Hey everyone, now we're going to jump into bag 4. This is going to be step 1. We have everything laid out here. We got all of our hardware organized, our 6mm, 10mm. During this bag build, we are going to have one 3mm ball stud, so we have that separated there. We got our 4mm ball stud here. Then we have our other assemblies, our shocks over here, and this is bag 1 and bag 3. All right, so we are going to build the dirt late model. So we will not need the dirt street stock frame rails or the dirt street stock and asphalt cage piece. So we'll set that aside. All right, so the first step here, we're gonna be jumping into the engine build. And the reason we're doing that is just show you how the air cleaner goes onto the engine. If you are building the late model, the truck or the dirt street stock, asphalt late model, then that doesn't use the air filter. All right, so the first step here, we're gonna be installing the headers. The easiest way would be just to take your headers and install those together like so. And then we're going to need the 6mm cap head screws and put it on the X wrench and start installing. Easiest way is to just put the screw through, locate your hole, and then screw it in. So it's going to be 4 of these screws per side. And as you can see, we're just going from back to front and screwing in each header. All right, left side's done. Next, we're going to jump onto the right side. Again, just put the screw on there, locate it, and sometimes it falls out. Now, if these holes are a little tight on this side here, you can take just a hobby knife and just clear those out a little bit to give you, there's maybe some flash in there, it just gives you a little bit more. It just opens up that hole so you can install the screw easier. So again, just working from back to front, installing those screws. They don't got to be super tight, but as soon as you feel it tighten up, you can stop screwing it in. And there you have it. There's your 2 halves. All right, so the next step, we're going to take another 6mm screw, and we're going to join those cases together, or the engine blocks. Hold it like so. Take that screw, put it in there, and screw it together. All right, then the last step, the last part of step 1, wrong screw. You need to grab the 10mm for the air cleaner, put that through the hole is the easiest, and then you're just going to take that and put it right through the top. Once it gets started, you're good to go, and tighten that down. And there you have it. Step 1 Bag 4 is complete. On to the next step, we're going to install the spring platforms in the front of the chassis rails. For this step, we suggest that you get some digital or dial calipers so you can measure the gap between the screw and the spring platform. All right, first step, we're going to install the screw into the chassis there. And then you're just going to screw it in enough to where it barely just comes through. Then you're going to take your spring platform and then make sure that the flange is at the base of the chassis. You don't want it the other way because then it won't capture the spring. And then just hold it with both fingers. One thing you could do here is, if it is a little hard, you could just take a pair of small needle nose pliers, hold it, and slowly turn it in until you get it started. And then basically what we want to do there is we just want to tighten that screw down until you see it just come through the bottom of the spring platform, like so. So you can see it there. And then in the manual, we suggest that you start with your preload on your front springs at 1 millimeter. So we'll screw that out until we think it's about 1 millimeter. Get your calipers, put them in there. It's 1.25, 1.1. Back that off a little bit. And this is just a good starting point to get you on the track, and then you can tune from there. And there you go, 1 millimeter. All right, grab another 10 millimeter screw. Let's do the other side. Again, just screw that in until you just see it starting to come through. Grab your spring platform. And tighten it. This one's going in a little easier. And then just tighten that down until you see that screw come to the base of the spring platform. And now we're going to adjust the preload for the spring. We'll measure it. Again, 1 millimeter. 1.2. There you go, 1 millimeter. Good to go. Next up, we are going to install the ball studs into the chassis rail here. We're going to be installing these 2 ball studs and then this one right here for the panhard bar. The panhard bar uses the 3 millimeter, and that's the 1 3 millimeter that's in this bag. And then these 2 are 4 millimeters. Now, if you do have one, if you do have our 3 millimeter net driver, this works great in this step. If not, this tool works good as well. But if you do have that tool, definitely makes life a little bit easier. So there's a 3 millimeter. And then we're just going to screw this in here to where you feel it tighten down to the base. And obviously you can see why we don't use a longer ball stud there, right? Obviously it would be sticking out another millimeter if that was a 4 millimeter. So just make sure your ball stud is, there's no gap here and it's flush with the plastic. Next up, we're going to be taking the 4 millimeter ball studs, putting those in the side of the chassis rail. And again, making sure they're flush. So there you have it, nice and flush. all 3 ball studs. And then we are going to take our side Nerf bar and install that. So the side Nerf bar goes into these holes, not these ones. And when you put that in there, you're just going to put it in just by hand. Press it in, and you are all done. All right, on to the next step. We are going to be installing our engine assembly into the chassis, or at least on the right side of the chassis, and our battery tray. For this step, we're going to need 2 of the 6mm screws, so let's just get those set aside, and 2 of the 10mm screws. The 6mm screws are for the battery tray, and then the 10mm screws are for the engine assembly. These are going to go in the bottom holes. Push it through. Locate the battery tray. Switch goes towards the front. Easy way to remember. Tighten that down until the gap closes up and you feel the plastic kind of yield a little bit. It doesn't need to be too tight. You know, as you're building these cars, you'll gain a sense of how tight the screws need to be. Okay, next we are going to install the engine assembly into the chassis. That is going to go through this hole like so, and you can see what I did here. It goes through this top hole, and then make sure the header goes underneath the Nerf bar. Grab your 10mm screw, find a hole in the chassis rail, and screw that in there. And again, just tighten it down until you see that gap close and you feel the plastic yield a little bit. Compress or tighten up. There you go. There you go. No gaps, you're good. And we have installed those parts into our right side chassis rail. On to the next step, we are going to be doing the servo assembly. First step is going to be installing 2 ball studs into these bottom holes here. They're going to go through the back side here, so just pay attention to the orientation of the part. Grab your ball stud and thread it in. And again, just make sure that it is flush with the plastic, like so. And there's your ball studs installed. All right, after that, what we want to do is we want to make sure before we put everything onto the servo that we power up the servo and ensure that the servo horn is centered. So find your receiver port. Obviously use the little saying that we talked about earlier, 1 to turn, 2 to burn. So 1 to turn, so that's going to go into channel 1. Make sure your wire orientation is correct because this servo does not have that little tab like the ESC does. We've already installed a battery in there, so now we're going to get the radio, turn it on, turn the car on, and then you can see here it's moving. So we're just going to center the steering trim. Obviously it's going to be different depending on what transmitter you put in here, so that's fully centered, and you are good. So now that is centered, next step is we are going to install the servo adapter on there, like so. And just use the table to push that on there. The fit between the spline and the servo adapter is really good. That's intentional to ensure that it doesn't skip any teeth. Then we're going to put the part that we just put on. Grab the spring, then the spring washer, and then the screw, and fully tighten that down. And you can see here the servo's off a little bit, right? So now we just need to adjust our steering trim like so. And that is ready to be put in the car in a later step. On to the next step, we're going to be installing the rear body mount, the fuel cell cover, and the fuel cell. So for this step, we're going to need a couple of the 10mm screws. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to we're basically going to build this assembly up. So a 10mm screw goes in the backside of the fuel cell. And now we're going to install the fuel cell lid. I need 2 of the 6mm screws. All right, there's your small little sub-assembly. Next, we are going to get some of the 10mm screws and attach it to the back of the chassis. Again, just getting those gaps closed up. Don't need to over tighten the screws too much. And then we need one more 10mm screw. It's going to go right here. Continuing on this step, we are going to now take our front suspension mount. Pay attention to the orientation of this. Make sure that it's going this way, with this being the front of the car. We are going to take our front chassis brace and we're going to install that. Part here. This just makes it a little bit easier to do it this way, outside of the chassis. So, then you're going to need 2 of the 10mm screws. And screw that into the front suspension mount. All right, now we're going to install the front suspension mount onto the chassis. We're going to need 1 10mm screw. And then this, if you could see here, obviously this flat is going to locate into that, and this is going to locate into the chassis. All right, there you have it. Now you see why we built this assembly first and then put it on the chassis. Made the assembly process a little easier. Next, we are going to install the front upper chassis brace. That is going to be coming, or I'm sorry, going up here. So that locates into there like so. And then it's going to locate into the chassis there. So these are both going to use the 6mm screws. Get this one started first. And there you have it. You are done with this step. All right, moving on to the next step. With this step, we suggest that you get these screws out. So you're going to need 4 of the 6mm and then 6 of the 10mm. And then obviously you're going to need your rear end assembly because we're going to be locating that in the chassis. All right, so let's get our screws. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We need 6 of those. So we got 2, 4, 5, 6. All right. So take your left side chassis rail. Install your header. And it doesn't really matter where you start from. You can start from the front or the back. Whatever you feel better with. We're going to start from the back just so we can hold that rear end in. It'll make the assembly process, I believe, a little easier. So you got your 10mm screw. It's going to go on the back side here. Another 10mm screw. Then the third one is going to go to the front of the fuel cell to connect that. And what's nice about this is it kind of locks the rear end in. Now we need to connect the battery tray into the left side chassis rail. That's going to be a 6mm screw. Wires start getting in the way here. Another 6mm screw. That's going to go down here. Okay, nice and tight. And then we need 2 10mm screws to get the engine block to the left chassis rail. And the last one down here below. And 2 of the 6mm into the front chassis brace. Nice thing is when you pull those screws out and set them aside, and then you got an extra one sitting there, you know that you're missing one. So this hole needs to be cleared out a little bit, so just use your hobby knife. Get some of that flash out of there. Then the last screw, where did we forget? We forgot down here at the front mount. All right, there you have it. We'll get this hooked up here in a minute. Next one we're on to is the servo installation. We are going to install the servo, and you can see here during in the assembly notes, you can use the servo extension depending how far your receiver is back. For our servo here, it's not going to need it. You can see it's going to easily make it to the receiver easily. So first step is we're going to route the servo wire through the engine block. Find that slot there. Pull your servo through. And then we're going to take our M2 by 6mm button head or truss head, screw, and we're going to clock that servo off to the side a little bit just so we can get access to that hole. And then install the screw. Bottom one's installed. Top one. And now we're going to plug the servo wire in. And remember, 1 to turn, 2 to burn. So the top port is our number 1. Make sure your wire orientation is correct, because on our servos we don't have that little tab here, so you can plug them in backwards. So just pay attention to that detail. Actually, let's redo that. We're going to get this under the frame rail here. And plug it in. And at this time, just to kind of keep the transmission from moving around, you can plug in your motor to the speed control. On to the next step, we are going to install our right-hand upper and lower radius rods. With these, you want to pay attention to their orientation. So you're going to have 2 that go like this, and then you're going to have 1 that's timed a little differently. This one is for the left-hand side of the car, and then these 2 are for the right-hand side of the car. All right. So easy finger push, pop those on, top and bottom. Doesn't matter which one goes where, they're both the same length. Then we're going to pop that onto the rear axle assembly, like so. There you have it. And then under here, we're going to connect the panhard bar. Probably the easiest thing to do is just get a small pair of needle nose pliers. And since there's not a lot of space for your fingers, just get down in there and pop that on, like so. All right, next we're going to install the shock. So we're going to need a 6mm screw. First step we like to do is just pop the shock on the bottom. That way it kind of holds it in place for you. And rotate it up to the shock mount. Go through the back of the chassis like so. And screw it together. Now you want to be careful. You don't want to over tighten these screws. You want that shock to be loose. Let me show you real quick here what I'm talking about. Pop that off. So see how it's pretty loose? You want to make sure it's loose. You don't want to make it tight to where like it's basically over compressed and restrained here. That's just going to bind up your suspension and your car is not going to work as well. Okay, on to the next step. We're going to install the door bar and then the upper cage mount. So first, let's grab our 4mm long ball stud, locate it in the door bar, and then install that in the side of the chassis here. Make sure that's tight and flush. Good. All right. That pretty much locates everything. Position it. And then we're going to take a 6mm screw, go to the front, and then the last 6mm screw is going to go towards the bottom here. There you have it, your door bars are all installed. Now we are going to install the upper cage mount. Again, this part, make sure it's got the right orientation. Install, kind of set it in place, and this is where you're going to use your 10mm screws. Actually, before we do that, let's make sure our motor wire is over here. Another 10mm screw, go to the front. Make sure there's no gaps when you tighten your screws. Also be sure not to over tighten. Go to the right side of the car. Another 10mm screw. And then our last 6mm screw is going to go right here. In this step, we are going to be installing the left rear shock and the left radius rod. So like we did on the right side, we're just going to pop that guy on there. Helps keep everything kind of in position when you're installing the top of the shock. Get your 6mm screw, Put it on your hex wrench. And install that screw. And again, you don't want to make that screw tight. You just want it to thread through the other side so it'll hold the shock on. And you're good. Got a little friend there. All right, next is we're going to install the radius rod. Super straightforward. We're going to pop that onto the front part. And then like so. And there we have it. We have the rear end fully installed. On to the next step, we are going to be doing the driver assembly. The driver assembly is not included with the vehicle. That part number is 1RC1089 and it comes with everything you need here to assemble that. So let's grab it. So you're going to see real quick before we jump in, we have the sequence of how you're going to assemble that. First is going to be the nut plate going through the driver figure and into the helmet. And then secondly, putting the headrest in. And for this step, we're going to be using the 6mm screws. Get our nut plate. Locate the screw in there like so. Put it through the driver figure and screw it together. So you want to make sure that's straight in there. You're going to tighten it down so the hole's lined up for the headrest. And snug that down. Next step, we are going to install the headrest. Another 6mm screw. And then locate the hole and screw in. All right, there is our driver assembly, ready to go. All right, moving on to the cage assembly. We're going to be building this top piece here. Obviously, we have two different ones here. The difference between that is two things. This is for the asphalt late model. This is for the dirt late model. So for the asphalt late model, you need to put the body mount in there, and that requires a longer screw. So we're not doing that. We're doing the dirt late model. And then just so you know, we have an assembly note here. The cage down bars are not used on the dirt street stock or the truck builds. So we also have our sequence here. We got our cage down bars. We're going to be putting the bars first into the rear cage hoop and then installing the front cage down bar. So with this step, we're going to need 4 of the 6mm screws. There's the front. There's the rear. And then we got our 2 cage bars here. And then just make sure so that's your right side cage bar with that piece. And then this is your left side cage bar. Grab our screws. And then obviously you have 4 holes here. You're going to start in that outer hole. And screw it together. And for the left side cage bar, again, you got your 4 holes here. We already went to that one. You're going to go into this hole. There you have it. And then just twist it around so it's straight. And the reason we do the rear cage down bars first is because then we're going to put this piece on, and it just makes it a lot easier to get to this side with the rear cage down bars before putting on the front piece. So 2 more of the 6mm screws. We're going to be coming through the back side now, like so. Screw that in until you see no gap. And there we have it. We have our cage assembly. On to the last step of bag 4. We are going to install the cage. We're going to need our inner plate and our driver assembly. One thing you'll notice here is the antenna. We like to just take this and just get a zip tie, a nice small one, and just strap it down to the frame rail. Like so. Doesn't have to be super tight. Get your diagonal cutters, trim that off. That's in place. All right. First step is going to be installing the driver. We're going to need 2 of the 10mm screws. We do this before putting on the inner plate. Just have a little bit more room to work with. And you can see what you're doing. Slide the motor wire over. Make sure that's out of the way. Get you some space in there. And just locate the screw in the back side of the driver. It's a good thing about the long tip wrench that we provide. Gives you the ability to insert the screws here. This one on the inside, you're going to come through the inside of the chassis rail here and screw it down. Like so. Next, we're going to install the inner plate. Those are going to be installed with 4 of the M2 by 6mm screws. These are not included in this bag, but they are included in the spare hardware bag. So if you don't have them, you can find them in there. We're going to put these 4 screws in. We're not going to tighten them down all the way until we get all 4 in. It just helps locate all 4 locations a little bit easier. All right, we located all those. Now we can tighten down the 4th one all the way. We're just going to go back and tighten the other 3. All right, your inner plate is installed. Next, we are going to install the cage mount, or the cage. So the easiest way, put these rear down bars through the back of the chassis, or through the inner plate, and then find their location, get them into their spot. And then what we like to do is start with screwing those in first before we start putting these other in. So this is going to use a 10mm screw back here. Doesn't really matter which side you put it in. Goes right there in that hole. Now do the right side. Get that positioned correctly. And screw it in. There you go. All right, next we're going to need 4 of the 6mm screws. And just start bolting this down. Two. And what I like to do is this, you can look through here and then kind of just tilt the car around, making sure it's going through the hole. Not sure where our other 6mm screw went, but we got a spare one. And we're going to install that right there. All right. So there you have it. Bag 4 is complete, and on to bag 5.